As you close your eyes, I invite you to become aware of this. You just had your energy, we just placed your energy outside of you, right? I invited you to look around the room. And and that's something that we're doing a lot. As storytellers, we are the seers of our times. We are the ones that are seeing not just the first layer of what's represented, but we're seeing behind it. We're seeing into the symbolic form. We're seeing into the metaphoric expression. What is metaphor but the language of spirit? And we're not only seeing, right? We're not only playing the role as a witness. As storytellers, we are speaking what we see. And today I'm going to enter into a conversation about what is it to be a conscious creator? What is it to be conscious of your impact and influence of one of those who speaks what they see? And so I invite you to begin, now that your energy was outside of you in that classic expression of storyteller, to bring your attention all the way inward, as if you could call all the bits and parts of yourself from all the different places back into your body being. And while you're calling all the bits and pieces of yourself, some of you might start to actually feel a little energy jolt, or you might to feel a little bit more inhabited in your body. And some of you might not. And there's no right or wrong way. This is just an attunement exercise. How can we attune to this extraordinary tool of our body and how it relates to energy and how that will eventually inform our capacity as storytellers? So as you're calling all the bits and parts of yourself back, you might as well just call your highest self in too. Why not? And you can really, call forth, and maybe your highest self is fully inhabited, or maybe it got scattered about doing other things. And as you call that energy of your highest self into your being, start to notice if there's anything in your energetic body that needs to shift. Like, do you need to sit a little bit straighter? And it's not even do you need to, do you yearn to? Does that space of energy, of spirit, require a little bit more spaciousness in your body? And so you might want to become aware of the bottoms of your feet, because we're doing that thing of being radically present, connected to the roots, and to see if you can't notice the outline of your feet. And maybe if you go to the edges of your feet, just notice, can you notice how that affects your knees and your hips? And again, there's no right or wrong in this, right? As storytellers, we are liberated from the story of right or wrong. We are in the whole story of just what is, just in the pure glee of noticing. And so as you're doing that, I invite you just to also imagine that there's a string at the top of your head and it just pulls you up a little bit. And now you're getting this nice straight alignment with your spine. You're lifting up your core. All of a sudden, those organs might have a little bit more spaciousness. Maybe you're one of those people that sits really straight, in which case I'm have a lot of envy. And so you're engaging those core muscles. You might just want to roll your shoulders back because you can't help yourself now. You're rolling your shoulders back and you're just noticing, how does that feel? Some of you are like, now my heart is all open. That feels so good. And some of you might be going, hey, that's not so comfortable actually. Or does it feel safe? And again, what we're doing is we're attuning to what are the stories in our bodies that are going on nonstop, affecting how we see the world, how we experience the world, and how we speak the world. Now I'm going to invite you just to get really present with your breath and breathing all the way down to the bottom of your belly. And you might even want to place a hand at the back of your back, the lower back, and take in a nice deep breath. And notice, can you feel like almost like a balloon is inside you and you can expand through the bottom of your belly, expand into your back. And as you exhale, just exhaling out anything that's ready to go. Maybe just imagine some stale air, pushing it all out. And this time inhaling in with the intention to get what you came here to receive. So take a nice, deep, slow breath as you really consider, what is it that you most yearn to receive from today's class, from this time together, from this exploration? What are you yearning to receive? And now just exhaling out any limitations that might be between what you want to receive. Maybe some of you are like, you know what, I want to receive a lot of love. I can't get that in this class. That's ridiculous. Whatever you came into your mind. I want to receive a lot of money. I can't get that in this class. Okay, that's fine. Let that one go. So it's like, just notice What was in your internal conversation about what you most yearn to receive? And is that possible to get right now? And so breathing in again as if you've already received that which you most yearn for. Breathing it in as if it is yours, as if it is already in your body. And now exhaling it out as if it's something that you have to give. Now I'm going to invite you into one last piece before we open our eyes again. And this is around imagine that right above your head is this golden ball. And this is the golden ball of joy. The energy of joy lives in this ball. And I'm going to invite you to imagine that golden ball comes right to the top of your head and into your body. And now, woof, you are like almost exploding with the energy of, that joy energy. And just notice what happens when you invite the energy of joy into your body. Some of you, it might be really easy. Some of you might feel a little bit stuck. And just noticing where can it come into your body, and is there a place in your body where it doesn't allow to go through anymore? And now I'm going to invite you to imagine that there's a bubble right above your head. This one's blue. It's peace. The sensation of peace, the energy of peace. And can you invite that into your body? Inviting peace into your body. Once again, just noticing what happens. What happens when you go there? And then finally, imagining grace. Imagining the energy of grace. What color is grace? And what does it feel like as it enters into your body? And now just considering really feeling this frequency of joy, peace, and grace. And what would it be if this was what you spoke? What would it be if the stories that you shared in the world brought this kind of gift? That every story that you spoke, regardless of what they're about, can hold these things inside of them because you hold them, inside of yourself. I'm going to bring you a quote. My cousin Helen, who's in her 90s now, was in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. She and a bunch of the girls in the ghetto had to do sewing each day. And if you were found with a book, it was an automatic death penalty. She'd gotten hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind, and she would take 3 or 4 hours out of her sleeping time each night to read. And then, during the hour or so, when they were sewing the next day, she would tell them all that story. These girls were risking certain death for a story. And what she told me, and when she told me that story herself, it actually made me realize that what I do is important. Because giving people stories is not a luxury. It's actually one of the things that you live and die for. That quote is by Neil Gaiman. I love that because it gives us this opportunity to leave the the myth that what we are doing here. Yeah, Stephen Jenkinson actually flips it and he says it's not that we're important; it's that what we're doing is meaningful. Look at the slight right tinge. I'm watching some of you nod, right? It's like check out the resonance of language and how it changes how it lives in our body, what we're doing, from being important to being meaningful. So I invite you into that kind of thinking today. I'm going to give you one more quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to see or be seen. and they tell us, and they can, sorry, let me start this quote again. I got ahead of myself. For those of you who've taken this, you know I've said this so many times, and apparently I've not memorized it. Okay, so we think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate. They tell us to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories will saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward and they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. I'm going to pause right here because again, now we're in a danger zone because we're using the language. I am using the language of we. So I always invite you whenever you see that's the language of we, just take a step back and say there is no such thing. Yes, there's the one and there's the blah blah blah, but there's also when we're speaking, when I'm speaking, try to use the language of I because I don't know what your story is. And I don't even know if you're in alignment or in agreement with this. So, but I'm quoting someone, and they're saying this is they're stating as if we all do this, but it might live in all of us at some point. So stories, they ride us, they whip us onward, they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. Maybe you don't do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name these stories, and then become a storyteller. That's by Rebecca Solnit. I love beginning with that quote because it really speaks to the journey of someone who is what I'm calling a conscious creator. First, you got to be able to see a story. Then you got to look at what it's in service to. Then you got to check out your relationship to it. Then you got to see what role you're playing inside of it. Then you got to decide if you want to carry that story all before you can even speak it, right? Now think about all the things that are happening in the world. Whew, gosh, how do we start? Okay, so a little bit about what we're here to do today. So we are checking out the landscape of sacred storytelling. What is it to approach storytelling as a sacred art form? What is it to approach story as a tool for healing, to explore your consciousness? So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about what is a story. I'm going to ask questions throughout our day, and these are real questions. I love hearing your voice. And so just know that when I ask, you can you can pop over into the chat room and speak there, or you can raise your hand. I'll keep my eyes on you, and you can speak here. So just know that your voice is truly wanted, and it feeds our conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about Creator Matrix and maybe what a myth is, and then I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a new story that I have never told in this space before. She just came barreling in this weekend. I really am quite fond of this story, and I look forward to sharing her with you. Look, apparently it's a she. Okay, so a little bit about my background. Um, I hailed from a farm in Vermont. I grew up on 40 acres, they call it the back 40, of land, and I got to grow up with finding the bones of cats in the spring. After long winters, I got to get to know a little creek. I had a tree that I climbed a lot. I spent a lot of time outside. And I really believe that that is what created the foundation of probably my relationship to nature, to the natural world, to wilderness, and to story, which I wouldn't discover till many years later. I was really lucky. I had parents that noticed that I had a little penchant for writing and for creativity, and they put me into theater at a very young age. And I again was talking about being lucky at the right place at the right time. I got to be taught at a very young age from some true masters of the art form. And was invited into a professional theater company when I was still in high school, and began to learn the responsibility of storytelling when my best friend committed suicide. And I was trying to make sense of that grief when I was 16. And I went to that place that I trusted more than anything, which was writing and storytelling. And I wrote a play that explored my way of trying to make sense of the world. And that play was won an award in a professional playwriting festival, and I got to see it on the stage. And I learned that responsibility about what you put out into the world comes back. That while I was trying to manage my own grief, and as I shared that with the world, it came back at me. As I then became responsible to stand with others and what was happening for them, what came alive through that story. I learned the business of theater and on all of that as, oh my gosh, we've got a dog in the house, Sahar. That's such a really cute dog. Sorry, I get distracted. um, so the business of storytelling I learned in New York City. I studied with Sandy Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse. I worked off Broadway. I worked in summer stock. And I also discovered probably my biggest monsters in life, which was rejection, the fear of rejection. And I soon discovered that I did not want to end up in a world where I felt like that was going to be like my number one, seater at the table. And so I left that world and I ended up going into, I went to college and I was looking for this way of marrying my love of the environment and um, and my love of story. And I was had an opportunity to again get to really explore and create performance art and really see what was happening when you spoke to what was happening in the field that you lived in. If that makes sense. So we got to create some really unique performances that involved the environment. And at the same time, I was looking at, I had been in all this world of theater, and I could see that something was happening in the room. There was this like kind of palpable magic, and I could feel the energy of it, and I kept wanting to use it. And that was really like the idea that I had. I wanted to use it. I didn't want it to like escape after we left the door, after we walked out of the room. And my love of social justice ended up taking me and getting a master's in social work and continued to work with youth at risk in the wilderness and started to understand systems thinking. And then I had a radical moment in my own life, this health crisis. I had left my passion behind, and my body was like, I will no longer go on that path. We are stopping right here until you can hear the truth of what's happening. And that's a much bigger story that I've told many times, and I'm not going to tell today actually. But what I'll share is that when I got my life back, when I came out of that place of deep listening, I was so clear that this question that was coming alive in me my whole life of how do we catalyze that energy that happens in this magical space was going to be probably the question that I would spend my life trying to answer. And I ended up starting a nonprofit called the Performance Initiative, which was all about utilizing the arts for social change. We did massive, massive events around politics, around getting youth involved. That ended up leading me to go to San Francisco. I ended up working with Al Gore, and I ended up running the Green Channel at his television network. And again, right in the nexus of how do we talk about climate? How do we get people engaged with what's happening? And how do we use this energy that happens in the space of storytelling to catalyze people? And I was working with this idea. What is the information you need to give people to get them to inspiration, to get them to motivation, to get them to activation? And what I discovered was that I was asking the wrong question. That while we looked at what everyone was watching, it wasn't information that they wanted or yearned for or were even looking for. It was it was something else. They were actually responding to story. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm asking the wrong question. And at a time of climate when the information is so overwhelming, I learned that good people, really good people with really good intentions, can do great harm if they don't actually understand what a story is and the power that it has over our lives. And and what I would say, just as a sidebar, since we're here talking about this, I've done a piece called "The Six Considerations for Climate Change," and and what I would say is the number one consideration is that we may have really done a really bad casting job, and we may change the bad guy, right? Climate change, as if this is a bad thing. This is a really surreal concept when you think about it, because the nature of our planet is change, right? So all of a sudden, to make change the bad guy is a very surreal thing. And what does that do to us as humans, who, as people on the planet have always been somewhat nomadic? When we look at the original way of how people lived in relationship with the natural systems and moved with the seasons, and it's like, no, the world's still doing what it always did. We changed. We became sedentary and stayed in one place and then got a little bit ticked off when the world kept changing. So it's like, it's interesting. It's a fascinating thing when you start looking at how big of a story can you get. Another kind of weird one is that we did some, well, I'm not going to keep going on that one because we can go for an hour just on that one thing of climate change. Okay, so that's a little bit of my background. And, what I eventually ended up doing was I ended up coming to this place of really understanding that story was king, that we actually can't metabolize information. that it gave me the keys to escape the form of journalism. And I started doing this thing called I started creating story ceremonies. And we were looking at how do you work with a story that's ready to change, for example, like a climate change story? How do you work with a story that's ready to change? And how do you bring people into a space where you work with the field, the magic that happens in that space? And then how do you create an opportunity for healing and change to happen in that place? I consciously did not use the word transformation because that's a very loaded term, and like really to change form, it's such a big thing to ask for. So I use the word healing because it's a little bit gentler on this on the system. For those of you who've gone through radical transformations, you know it's a thing. It's a strange thing to pray for, you know. So here we go for. So I ended up creating story ceremonies. I ended up touring them all around the world, or excuse me, all around the country, and really working with some of the bigger issues of our time. And it was been really fun and a lot of joy and a really fun way to meet the times that we're living in head on. And so I want to talk a little bit about where is some of the most ancient wisdom, like how do we know that story is trustworthy as something to really play, place our faith in right now? You know, what do you believe in? This is the big question of our time. So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy that they can slow the world or set it into motion. When we think about so many indigenous cultures that had a relationship with the land, they were speaking the tongue of the land that they lived on, you know, and that you think about, you know, it's like now it seems like a cliche thing to do a rain dance. But when you think about the people who are in such deep relationship with the people that they could call the rain, you know, that they could speak to the clouds, that they understood that their embodied prayer is so powerful that it not only are they affected by the world, but that can affect and influence the world through their language. Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. I always stop on that one when I start feeling really like that little the anger, the shake start to come up, and I'm like, oh God, you know, oh be careful because I can't ever take back what's about to come forth, right? We can't ever take back our language. There's actually a great there's a term, I can't remember it right now, in physics that speaks to that. Once a word has been spoken in a space, it actually lives there forever. I think about that when I drive through car stops, like truck stops. You're like, you know, this is a transient place, but everything that's been spoken here is still here, you know. So we can't take back what we say, but we can repair it. And that's a whole other thing. Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present in order for the future to exist. Maoris say that words don't describe a thing, they are the thing. In Japan, there is a word called kotodama. It means word spirit, and it refers to the original divine spirit of a word before it enters the world of thought waves. So the significance of kotodama is that words are alive and they have a power to create. Abracadabra is one of the most ancient words that we have on this planet. There's actually a little disagreement of where it comes from, but I think it's understood as being from the ancient Aromatic mysticism. Abracadabra, I create as I speak. I'm going to read you this short little poem. It's by um, Edward Field translated it. It's from the, it's from, it's an Inuit understanding of the world. In the very earliest time when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, or an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was a time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody could explain this. That's just the way it was. Okay. So all the ancient religions agree on this one thing, which is that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I'm going to say that again because it's kind of mind blowing when you really take it in. That all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So now when, I'm from the East Coast, right? And so we have this kind of natural critique and sarcasm towards the world. You just can't help it. It's just ground into us if you're from the Northeast. And so when I started hearing about this kind of like, oh, the cup is half full and just see the world as positive, I like just kind of wanted to gag a little because it just seemed so, pretendy. But when I started to understand and follow the scholarship of language, and I started to understand this idea and one of the original keys to understanding, you know, our place on this planet, our humans' unique place on this planet. When you understand that all the original people understood that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence, that we start to understand our unique place on the planet as creators, that we're on this creator planet, and that we are creators through every word that we speak. But many of us, not all, but many of us have either not been taught that, or have forgotten or don't even believe it. But all of us have someone in our lives that does, and we've seen it activated, we've seen it engaged. You probably see even the life force that comes through them, that what they speak does come into being. And so I invite you into this kind of way of understanding what's your relationship to language? What's your belief system to how powerful your words are? Of course, you can't help but kind of study a little bit about where did your belief systems come from. We're going to explore that, you know. And this is just a very strange sided note, but I just heard this a couple years ago, and I have not forgotten it since then. And to me, it's kind of the great grief of so much disconnection. And just because we're disconnected doesn't mean that, just because we don't know about them doesn't mean that they're not happening. So tobacco, um, many indigenous cultures, this is a sacred plant. This is a plant that they use in a very specific way. And one of the ways that they use it is to pray with it. And prayer is something that you use your words out loud. It's not a meditation. A prayer happens out loud. You speak out loud. And the tobacco carries those prayers, for us. Well, this person was saying, so many people are smoking cigarettes nonstop without any awareness that their language is being carried up, and all this swearing is happening and all this stuff. And it's like it's actually affecting our greater, way of being, because all these words are being carried up, and amplified. So I just love that idea of what is it to be in that deep kind of connection. So let's kind of get into this idea now, since we're walking down this path. What is a story? What is a story? Dominique, it was so fun to see your face there for a moment. Um, what is a story? It's a real question I'm asking. You can raise your hand. You can place it in the chat box. Yes. Dominique, are you raising your hand? Or are you just saying hi? Yes, Melissa.
The first word that comes is experience.
Hmm. It's an experience. And it's an experience that we're sharing,
Yeah.
right? We're sharing it by giving it, we're amplifying it, we're allowing it to continue to live. It's one of the strange things I think about stories that, like the mystic studying of stories, they don't they don't follow the laws of many other things on this planet. Like we have this universal rule called entropy on this planet, where everything eventually breaks down. The car is going to rust, the house is going to fall apart, the statue will eventually get blown to bits by the wind. It's like it's just a natural thing that happens. But stories, our experiences from the past, have this capacity to be carried from one human to another, kind of like a virus. And that sounds horrible, but look, it travels. It goes from one human to another. It continues to stay throughout time and space, and it never breaks down unless the person stops speaking it. So it's such an amazing thing. Um, Lottie is saying, I hope I'm saying your name right, is it's a gift. I love that idea that we give our stories, we give our experience, we give our wisdom. And right, Laura's saying it's a connection to self. And yes, it's Starhawk once something said something. I run a school for sacred storytelling, and I get to bring in all kinds of wonderful guest speakers. And Starhawk came in, and she said something that I felt inside of me, but she put these words to it that when she had a big question that she was really grappling with, she would take it to a story and she would work it out there. And we'll talk more about that. Right? I'm seeing Teresa smile, nod, right? It's like, yeah, like this is such a great way. We don't have to have the answers, but and when we take it into the form of story, we can have this opportunity to reflect, and we get to hear voices and perspectives from all these different places and ways. And yes, it's a form of expression, says Lisa, right? It's a way of expressing who we are in the world. I always think about like, what story are you going to invite to the dinner table? How are you going to choose to express? Even when we're talking about, gosh, we just lived through when we're still living through it, such crazy times, so much unknown, you know, how do you talk about it at the dinner table? you know how do you speak about it? How do you invite fear, the presence of fear, and what form does it get to take through the stories that you speak? How do you handle that fear of the unknown? How do you start spell casting and predicting horrible things in the future, right? There's a lot of that going on, and when we say that this is going to happen, that's like casting a spell. I always think about that when they say the oceans are going to empty in 2050. Cancel that. We have so much capacity and so much brilliance and so much genius. The oceans are healing. What just happened this past year? Coral started coming back. Let's cast that spell some more. Okay, so Holly's saying that we're sharing ideas, right? It's like there's this, but whose ideas? That's the thing I want to play with. Um, Marika's saying sharing a sound and a meaning across time, right? And so now I'm thinking about this, the universal nature of stories. John Steinbeck says that a story must be about the reader, it will not last. That means that when we come to the table of sacred storyteller, and there's different ways of being with stories. So I'm focusing on right now the role of sacred storyteller. It means that we've got something to share. We've got something to give. It's no longer about me. It's about you. Right. And that's a specific kind of story. There's another kind of story, which we talked about reflection, and we saw this in the Me Too movement, where we're like, wow, there were a lot of stories that were going untold. And did we see the consequence of that, right? And one of the things, or I'll just say look, I did it again. It's so easy to do the we thing, but wow, did I see the consequence? And one of the things that really struck me was hearing so many of the same stories over and over and over again. To me, that was perhaps one of the most devastating parts. I was thinking if more people told their stories, then more people would know what they shouldn't expect as normal. That they would have another way of what their expectation of life. And so how can we speak those stories? But anyway, when I talk about that, there's one story when you come to where you're like, I'm ready to give you my gift. And there's another story where you're like, something is happening, I'm trying to work it out. And and this is not a gift to be given. I actually need you to come sit and listen to me. And we know that specifically around stories of trauma, that there's a very specific process that is missing from our time, where you bring people in and you say, can you please listen to this story? And and witnessing a story is a different kind of experience, where the person needs to be listened to and witnessed and not questioned. Okay? It's not about questioning them. It's about listening to what their experience is and having that pure sensibility to be received. Okay, and this is part of a much different process, which I call tell a bigger story, which is about working with story as a healing process. So you got me off on that. I don't normally talk about that here, but here we are. This is what happens. Um, oh my gosh, you guys are so talkative. So, oh my gosh, I hope I'm saying your name right. Jairoth. Um, Oh, it has to leave. Okay, I don't need to. I don't need to read that. Need to read that. Ashrad is saying story is continually of life expressed with rhythm. Oh my gosh, I love that. Stories carry the magic of inspiration, creativity. Stephen Jenkinson, who is one of my teachers and someone who I catch him while he's still alive. He's extraordinary. But he talks about the relationship between rites, R-I-T-E, and rhythm. They're connected, and tale, Tale, and tally, right? And so when you look at the etymology of this language, when you look at that story is a tale, has a rhythm. There's an arithmetic relationship to storytelling, and it's like we look at the information, but maybe it's not about information, but there is a telling, there's a keeping track that we're doing in through our storytelling. Um, Billy is saying that words are symbols once removed from our inner being. Oh, gosh, I hate this idea that they're removed, but yes, this is what Billy's saying. And so, what is symbol? But it's the most ancient language of being human, right? And so, it's our first language, symbols. And yet it's still here, it's still in us, even if we don't have the practice of using it. So one of my favorite games to play is let's think about someone that you know really well, and then think about what's their symbolic form. How do they show up in symbolic form? And now all of a sudden, and you just knew. It's like you got it that quickly. And you might not understand. Oh my God, my best friend just showed up like a dragon, or she just showed up like a sunflower, and then you can start to ask yourself, well, what is your consciousness telling you about the breadth and depth of the mythos of this person? What is a myth? Now I'm really going off. This is Loke comes to so many of these classes, so I have to keep adding new things each time. But what is a myth? Myth is it's the language of spirit. No, sorry, hold on. What is a myth? What is a metaphor? Metaphor is the language of spirit. So when we start looking at people around us, we start looking at the metaphors that can come through this symbolic expression. Now, since I brought up the topic myth, what is a myth? It's a. I love myths. I love this description of a myth. It's a story that has no author. It's a free being. A myth is one of those wild creatures. I think some stories have been captured, perhaps even enslaved, by being written down into one form where they're forced to stay that way forever. What a strange thing to do, you know, whereas a myth is running wild. No author. The essence continues to change, but it's played like an instrument through each person that it comes through, or it's playing the instrument of the person that it's coming through. Um, I can't read all of these because I want to continue on into this other piece of adventure of um, what is a sacred story. So if we understand what a story is, so we're starting to understand what a story is. I'm going to give one more expression just to kind of bring it all in. It's everything that we talked about, and what to really simplify it. I'm going to say that a story is an operating system. And it's an operating system where we learn our values, our belief systems, what roles we can or shouldn't play in our lives, and what we believe is possible. So when we consider that a story is an operating system, now start looking all around you and start considering all the different stories. Coming right back to that first quote by Rebecca Solnit, you know, what is a story? And now start looking at the stories that you were told as a child, through the fairy books, very, through the fairy tales when we were children, Hollywood, Walt Disney. What did that do to your expectation of life? What did that do to your role, to the roles that you expected to play? What did that do to your fantasy or belief systems around relationship? It's all in there. The story is all in there. Okay, so now we're going to enter into this conversation of what is a sacred story? What's a sacred story? I'm getting quiet on me now. Emily, the metaphor, I understand it. Metaphor is the language of spirit. So, right, okay. So Sahara is saying a sacred story is it's devotional to unity. Wow. Okay. So she's talking about the language of devotion, and so now we're saying that that the story is in service to something. Okay. So when we're looking at a sacred story, we're saying, oh, it's in service to something, and I would say it's in service to life thriving. So now we're like, oh, this isn't just any story that we've got going on. It's a story that has spirit in it. So now again, we're talking about that. We were talking about has a life form in it, right? So it's like, what is a story that's in service of something and has a life form in it? It can alter your own patterns, right? And I just Jessica said that, And this idea of when you come in to the room, you're telling a story and you're holding the resonance of peace in you, and you're holding the resonance of grace and joy. You know, what would it be? How many of you got to see the movie Life is Beautiful? Did you see that? It's an extraordinary, extraordinary film. I strongly recommend it. To me, it's one of the most extraordinary examples of a sacred story in our time because that story took place in a Holocaust camp, right? Many of you are going, I'm not going to go watch that film. This is one of the most amazing, delightful films I've ever seen in my life. And and they did it. They did it. They were able to bring joy and humor and love and grace and human connection into one of the darkest, most devastating moments of human history. You know, I mean, if that isn't a sacred story, I don't know what is. Something that can help you look at and be present with things that is a great opportunity for humans to live from while bringing that which you most want to bring and experience in the world. So, wow. Um, Breaking down harmful patterns and opening doorways, said Jessica. Right. So now you're talking about it has this opportunity to be transformational. What is transformation? We're going to get into it. It's changing form. I have one of my most fun stories that I ever wrote was about this little butterfly that lives he's a Jewish New York butterfly and he lives in Central Park and he talks about what a fucking mess it was to go from being a caterpillar where he got the total meltdown and then he grew this big wings. He didn't know what to do with them. So it's like it's kind of fun. Like, how can we make fun of these parts of our lives that really suck? And if you've gone through a big transformation, I was going through a big transformation at the time, and I'm like, why are people praying for this? This is horrible. It's so painful. This whole not knowing what you are and what's becoming. But like, this is where I love storytelling because we can take the muckety muck and the most like hard feelings and put them into this form where they can rewire us and they can actually help the healing, the integration, the changing form by bringing in all these other energies to assist us. So it's like, can you bring humor in, and can you bring joy in, and can you bring laughter in to those things that really scare us? And that's where story is just like, right, it shakes it. Like, I think of it as like being in the jail. If you're in the jail of around feeling a certain way, and then you can bring in a story and it can rattle the cage, and it can bring a whole new way of reorganizing your energetic and your nervous system and how you experience something. Okay, so Emily's saying it connects you to something greater. Yes. Oh, she's using this word truth. This word truth, man, nothing scares me more than the word truth. A little fun fact, it's actually a carpentry term, truth. It's when you have a true line, it's a straight line. You use it to understand something that's straight. There's nothing, most things aren't very straight in our world, so truth is a complicated term. But what I like to talk to is that we have these universal truths, these inner nods. When you say something, I'm like, oh yeah, I can feel that. There's a resonance inside there. There's an inner truth that's happening. There's an inner resonance that's happening. So that's where I'm going to use that language. Melly or Mel is saying it's a deep invitation to release and then reweave our connection with who we really are, an interconnectedness with all extraordinary alive. Right, Melly, you just kind of blew the roof off, right? Because she's talking, whoa. So story is kind of like it is a part of the weaving of the great interconnectedness. Right, we can still talk stories about how the rhinoceroses talk to each other and get wisdom teachings that apply to how I should invest my money. Right, how bizarre is that? Right, that there's this great interconnectedness through time, and it comes through our language, and again, metaphor, and it connects us to land, and it connects us to the animals, and it connects us to our great participation in all of time. And story does this without having to talk about it or explain it. you know um, I could go on that, but we're gonna meander on out because we're coming so close. This was the fastest hour, you guys. We're just like we're about to dive to the top of it. So we'll say a couple more things, and then we'll continue on our way. So what I would say about a sacred story is that the second we call something sacred, it's a setup, and it's a setup because and how the language is employed right now is that we it's like it means that when we say that one thing is sacred, oh, look at that beautiful sacred mountain, as if the mountain right next to it isn't sacred. It's like it's kind of mind blowing. And what are we using with the language of sacred? We're saying, I see the divine in you. I see the life in you. I respect and value the life in you. Right. And so we are using this language, and I call on this language when I talk about sacred storytelling because that way of being is not so often practiced in the cultures that many of us exist in. And so we're calling it back. We're calling back that language so that we can live in the resonance and say, yes, there is such a thing as a sacred story, a story that has a life form inside of it. Now, what does it mean to be a sacred storyteller? And what's the opposite of a sacred story? So, if we say a sacred story is something that is like bringing us together, connecting us to all things, connecting us to each other, bringing healing, it's in service of life thriving, right? Now, what's the opposite of that? We go to the opposite spectrum. We're looking at zombie stories. And a zombie story is not in service to life. A zombie story is that story that you kind of want to die a little. A zombie story might tell you that people aren't good for the planet. Now look at all the television that you're looking at and notice, how do you feel when you're done watching a television show? Do you feel better about yourself? Do you feel invigorated and thrived and inspired? And or do you feel like you just want to die a little? You know, and or you can't even feel anymore because you've just watched so much violence that you've become numb to it all and expect it as normalized. So I invite you to really put on. I love this idea of like, um, you know, when I go into the ocean, if I close my eyes, I'm just terrified. Right? I'm like, I know there's a shark or something that's going to come and get me. And it's like this fear comes up because I can't see what's there. And I think of this as the same way. When I put on the goggles, all of a sudden my fear dissipates. I can see what's there and I can respond to what's there. And so I invite you to put on your super amazing sacred storytelling goggles or your sacred story goggles and be able to look through your world now and be able to see everything and what's there. And we know, what do we know about sharks? They've been, what a bad marketing campaign. More people die each year from coconuts falling on them than shark attacks. And so same thing with a bad story. If you see a bad story, if you see a shark in the water, you're like, well, that's fine, but you don't have to like run in fear. It's not going to kill you. You just respond accordingly. And so I invite you onto that way of building that way of resilience and strength. When you see a zombie story as a sacred storyteller, you can just sit back and do a little tai chi and watch it fly on by. You don't have to choose to carry it and have it inside of you. This is the one thing I would leave you with, is that, you know, the great illusion in the world of storytelling, it's the greatest magic trick of all time, is that the storyteller has the power. The storyteller does not have the power. The listener. The listener is the one in this relationship that is actually the one that's giving life to the story. This is I'm telling you, it's a great magic trick. It's sort of like, this is kind of a, I don't know if it's a crude analogy, but I'll use the garden. You know, it's like the garden. What seeds will you plant? You know, you can plant any seeds in a garden, but if the garden isn't well tilled, and if you don't water it, if you don't take care of it, if it doesn't get sun, that seed won't grow. So, what stories are you allowing into your great garden of the consciousness of your body, of your mind, of your nervous system? Which ones do you amplify? Which ones do you tend to? So, if there's anything um, that I want to invite you into, is that way of being, of really knowing how powerful you are as the carrier of stories, as a listener, and as that one that chooses to repeat or amplify them. So I'm gonna leave you with a little fun story today. It's a new story. And while I pull it up, I want to invite you to think of something that you're avoiding. Um, and Cammy's asking, you know what? So when I ask those questions, anyone can raise their hand, or sometimes people just comment, and it's totally what happens. So at this point, we're coming around the bend, and what's going to happen is I'm going to share a story, um, and then the class of this time will be complete. But then um, what I'm then if you're still like, wow, I want to do more of this and I really want to learn about, it's like, what are the things that are coming alive in me that really want to be expressed and yearned in the world? I have some great, really wonderful classes that are coming up. And so I'll stay for a couple of minutes extra and I'll share those with you and then we can talk And if there's any questions lingering, we can talk more then. This is just a couple minutes of a story. And what I want to do is I want to invite you into first considering, like, is there anything in your life that um, that you're avoiding? You know, is there something in your life that you really are 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 avoiding, and that is holding off, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger? I mentioned this earlier about Starhawk, about this idea that when there's something that's banging around in our mind, sometimes we can journal about it, and that's great. But we're just going to be operating out of our ego mind, which is on a track. We know what we know, and sometimes when we exit that ego mind and we enter into the realm of a sacred story, and what is it to enter into the realm of a sacred story? Is you're inviting that muse, the ancestors, the earth speaking out loud. That's what Sean Kane says a myth is. Also, it's the earth speaking out loud. We allow that to come through us. Joseph Campbell said to always keep listening for the new myths of our time, meaning that while we know that a myth, all of these creation stories they were spoken through some human eventually, and why wouldn't the creation myths of our time be spoken through you? you know and so this is a process of, as we enter into the realm of a sacred story, of this deep listening and collaborative approach where I don't have to know the answer. All I have to do is be willing to listen and to be danced, dare I say, by the muse. So I was working with fear. I've been working with fear a lot lately. Maybe you guys know a thing or two about fear. And I really wanted to find the keys to liberation around it. I wanted to understand it a little bit more, and so I'm going to read you the story, and may it feed you. And what I want, what I would, my best invitation is that perhaps there is something in you that you're wanting to work out a little bit. And may this story serve as a prompt for you to either create your own little mythology about who is fear and how does fear run in your life and what do you know about it and what can you learn about it through the experience of this creative writing exercise. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, there's a little rock, and it was all tied up in itself. It was in a horribly tight way, and it cried, and it was all just like a big old mess. And it rocked and it rolled, and it was thrashing through the forest, and boom! It hit a rock, and the spirit of just like popped on out of the rock because it was way too big for that little rock. And so this little being that was once a rock, but now walked as a spirit, went through life. And it played and it tumbled and it got stronger and it got stronger and it got stronger. But it was lonely. And he saw many people. But he had this like weird thing about him, which is that whatever he got close to, he amplified. And many would get scared of what they were feeling and they would leave. But then one night he saw one and she looked particularly brave and he could see that they could be great friends. And that they could have a lot of fun wrestling together. This was the thing about this little spirit. Just loved to wrestle. He was a really good wrestler. And one day, this little girl was walking late into the night, and he could tell that she was concerned about walking in the dark. So he came up and he walked right beside her to keep her company. But the strangest thing happened. Because she was afraid of the dark, and when the spirit was closer together, her fear got bigger and bigger and bigger. The disturbance of her peace became amplified. And then the strangest, most unexplainable thing happened, and no one knows exactly how or why. It was just a dumb luck that they had, that they were walking under a full moon that had this way of shedding light on what they might not normally see. But they say that she could see and feel that spirit, and she made a run for it. Well, just like an animal does when it plays, that spirit couldn't help but chase, and it caught the girl with no problem at all because they were in the light of the full moon. And maybe just because it was just that time, that little spirit jumped inside of the little girl, which is when it discovered it never had to be alone ever again. Well, with the spirit inside of her, the darkness looked like it could swallow her whole. But then the spirit whispered to her to stop her foolish running from that thing she could not escape, nor outrun, and just look at it. And so, with the guidance of this little spirit, the little girl did just that. She walked into the forest where the light of the moon did not shine, and she opened her eyes and she saw nothing. And she blinked and she saw nothing again. And then she started laughing. "You're a good friend," she said, rubbing her belly, which was where the little being had started taking up residence. I am, it asked, delighted to hear such a thing, since this was its first attempt at being a friend. What shall I call you? The little spirit didn't know how to answer. Your name, she asked. I have no name, the little spirit answered. Well then, she said, I'm going to call you Fear. Yes, you helped me face what I am most afraid of. I couldn't have done it without you. And so the story goes on and on. But anyway, um, may you have fun with the things that you're working with, and may you find a new way of understanding those which you're avoiding. you know may you let storytelling be a way into um, reveling in the awe and the wonder of getting access to more wisdom than you might have had on your own. So that was our story for today. If some of you want to hang out and talk a little bit more, if you have questions, I'll say a little bit longer. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what is coming down the pike, which is two really fun classes. One of them is called Speak Your Spark, and it is this class that is starting at the end of this month. We have five extraordinary guest speakers, guest teachers coming on to 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 bring you a way of, we started this class coming alive in your body, really understanding your body as a vehicle. We started to talk about what is in you that's wanting to be expressed in these times. And I feel like this is really the time. This is our time. They say, this is a time we've been waiting for. Your voice is so needed. Your passion is so needed. And what do we know about the word of desire? Is that it's connected to destiny. And what is that connected to? But it's a pathway of our stars. And I say this right now because I'm inviting you to come into that deep question of what is it that you are desiring that wants to be expressed through you. And some of you might know, and some of you might not know. And this class is called Speak Your Spark because we're getting together as a collective to really engage that creative life force, to engage the creative process, and to work with teachers from around the globe who will help you with your body, with your voice, to have fun. Can you imagine having fun speaking in public? To really expand your expression in the world at a time when the world now more than ever needs what you have to bring to it. So this course is really truly designed to kind of blow the lid off. And what I do is, if you're sitting there and you're like, this creativity thing seems really fun, and I want to radically transform my relationship to creativity. And you might say, well, creativity and writing, that's just something I do on my own. But what I understand about when you start tapping the creative life force, it starts engaging every part of your life. It comes through your work world. It comes through your relationships. When you start working with story, all of a sudden you start living your life in a different way. You always say, if you're not careful, if you don't know what the story is, you could, if you're not writing the story, you might find yourself getting stuck playing a role in someone else's story. And so that's where this class is really designed to blow the lid off, in terms of giving you full access to find the different ways and avenues to express what is yearning to be expressed through you. And you won't be limited to just writing or storytelling, which is it's a new way of being with us. And if you're beginning to feel like, oh, that could be for me, I'm really excited about that. What I do is, when you register in the next 24 hours, I offer up the free the library of master classes, which this is actually pretty epic. Which this is over 4 years of teachers like Stephen Jenkinson, who I was quoting, and Carolyn Casey and Michael Mead and Charles Eisenstein, just like absolute luminaries who are all focused on this one topic that we were exploring together: with how do we be storytellers? How do we be conscious creators in our time? How do we use this precious life force to really, what stories will you leave behind? And what gifts will you leave behind? So that is Speak the Spark. And when you register in the next 24 hours, you will get that over 40 hours of extra classes. So it's super fun. If there's anyone here that, I know there's a couple of you that have been in those classes before, if you want to speak up, feel free to share your experience. Um, the other thing that's happening, and this is a brand new thing that's happening, and um, I've never done this before, and this is called the Story Starter Lab. And I did this because I had many students that would come through. The other thing about Speak the Spark is that it really does help you understand what your unique creator matrix is. And we've had a lot of people come through and they understand who they are as creators. And we've been very, very focused on specific kinds of stories. So, for example, after Speak Your Spark, there's going to be a whole section on just writing vision stories. So that's going to be a 4-week class where you learn how to write the new vision, do the spell casting for the future. And it's a very specific technique that we use. So you might say, oh, that's great. I want to write, but I'm not so interested in a vision story. Well, then, for you, this is a Story Starter Lab. And we come together and you'll get creative prompts and you'll get to write each week. You'll get to start your own story. And then there's also a workshopping time. This is a separate class. You might say, well, actually, I have all these old stories that I really want to bring into completion. How do I do that? And we have a workshopping class. So that's where you really get to come in this creative community. And that is coming right up as well. That's right there. And the last thing that I'll share is that I didn't talk so much about this, but I do a form of mystic storytelling. And it's an ancient form of storytelling where you actually divine the story as it's living, as basically, I see the story that you're living in the mythic dimension. And I do this in one-on-one sessions, and we also do it in group once a month. We meet in story council, and it's a way of exploring what's living in your consciousness, what roles are you playing, what archetypes are being expressed through you, and really getting access to that language of spirit as it's expressed through metaphor. And so if that is calling to you, I just put the link to learn more about that. And you can also join our monthly story council, which is Hour of the Wolf. Yes, Emily, it is a healing session. It's a way of getting to step out of the story as you know it and receive guidance and insight and different ways of being in relationship to yourself, to your consciousness, and to story itself, and to the way that you're living your story. It's super fun. So that is that. And then the last thing I would say is I do something called storytelling, story priestessing. So if you're here and you're like, wow, I love all this, but all this group stuff, no, I just want the one-on-one, And then I do have something where I work with people one-on-one as you're crossing that threshold of bringing your creation into the world. It's one of my favorite things to do with people. Okay, any questions? Thank you, Cami. Yes, there is a replay.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this hour. It's my first time visiting you, and I'm definitely looking into the Medicine Stories web link. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, let me leave you with a quote. Because it's always, why do we leave with a quote? You might wonder. And the reason why we end with a quote is it's very much like, um, it's very much like when at the end of my Tai Chi class, I bow to my teacher. But I'm not really bowing just to my teacher. I'm bowing to my teacher's teacher, my teacher's teacher's teacher. And so we begin and end with these quotes in the same way of honoring those who have come before us, who have really taken on this way of being with language and story and being one of the weavers of our time. So I like to honor them as we come in and as we go out. And so this is with an elder that many of you know. Love is the burning point of life, and since all of life is sorrowful, so is love. The stronger the love, the more the pain. Love itself is pain, you might say. The pain of truly being alive. But love bears all things. Love itself is pain, you might say. The pain of being truly alive. And that is by Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. So may your stories call forth love, and may you share love through all the stories that you tell. Okay. Wishing you all the best. We can take yourselves off mute. Have a good day.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Laura, can I ask you a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
first, I'm so excited that my friend and I have joined the class, and we just cannot wait. But in telling the stories of, let's say, racial injustice, how do you tell the truth of what's going on without um, how do you tell the truth of what's going on without I guess in a way that will uplift instead of make that more concrete, but not being in denial of it either.
Yeah, no, what a great question. What's even greater is that we actually have Justin is going to be talking about just that as one of the guest teachers, in terms of like how do we talk about the hard times, with bringing love and compassion and not repeating or you're speaking like how do we not repeat all the old patterns that led to us to get to this place, what do stories do? But there's the wisdom story where we get to name and see where we come from. But what does story do? But it gives us some context, it gives us some meaning, so it's like there's so many different ways that you could talk about, how do we just talk to and give people some context of how did we get here? I mean, how we got here to have the opportunity to have this much racial tension is a miracle all into itself. When you think about just what it is to have so many people who've never come into relationship with each other come in. So it's like as a storyteller, one of the things that you can do is you can start to be how big can your story be? How much context can you create? You know, Again, I think one of the quick and easiest ways to get to what you're trying to do without giving you like I can't give you the 6 bullet points to how to do this, but what I
Right,
can
right.
do is what is the sacred story that wants to come through you, and that's a humble process. That's where you say I don't have all the answers, and just as you said, like I know that I want to do something. So then you say, well, what am I in service to? And that one question could seriously guide you all the way through and could allow parts of your story that you never would have imagined. So when you say what am I in service to, what is the story in service to, if it's in service to healing, the parts are going to reveal. You might end up talking about, and I think of the book My Grandmother's Hands. Have you read that?
No.
Oh gosh, read that book. I can't remember his last name. It's so much about race and trauma, and it starts off about his relationship with his grandmother, you know. And so I think that it's like you're asking such a big question, so I'll just answer. I'll say a
I
couple.
know, probably wasn't fair to ask her at the
No,
end,
it's
but
fine. I mean, these are the worthy questions to grapple with. But I would say the more personal and the less conceptual, right? Because when we're talking about concept, now we're going to all start bumping against our own ideas of what's right and wrong, blah, blah. But if you just tell me a really personal story about somebody, and if you start telling me healing stories or vision stories or medicine stories where you show a situation, like I'm thinking of The Mystery of Love is a film that was produced by the Fetzer Foundation, and they told all these stories about people that had gone through horrific things that seemed unforgivable, and how those people found a way to forgive and find their way to love. So like one of those stories is about a man whose son was shot by a young boy that was in a gang, and how he ended up befriending that young boy, and they've had a lifelong relationship, right? So you're talking about violence, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about like all these horrible things, but you're telling it through the lens of love, and so it's like we have to find these stories of where someone has made it through and amplified those, because that carves the path for other people to be able to even see what could be possible or just imagine something else. The other thing that I would just say, and it's almost so easy that you take the concept that you're working with and you throw it into the mythic dimension and you tell it as a fairy tale. And now it's bigger and it's not so personal, but all the values, all the belief systems, all the different things that you're wanting to convey can come through just the same way. Does that make sense?
yes, thank you so much.
I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, same here.
Okay, great. All right, Dominique, good to see you again. Yay. All right, any other questions?
I Hi, I'm Laura. I'll give you just a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from. I've been a teacher for 25 years, high school and community college, and I found my way to Joseph Campbell's The Hero Within. And so I framed a lot of my teaching to my students around being their own heroes on their own journey. And I found my way to Pacifica Graduate School, about using art as a way to be a social activist. And then here's one of the last pieces. I'm currently in a doctoral program on leadership change in higher education. And like, Marie asked earlier, focusing on mental health and wellness and traumas that we've been dealing with individually and collectively is a really complex weave. So as a teacher yourself, how do you find a way in to healing that systemic oppression that has to start at the top with the leaders and not the grassroots movements that we are all involved in? How did I do on that question?
I caught part of it, but I'm trying to get all of it. So so if I'm catching you, it's like you're talking about working with leaders,
Yeah,
and you're talking about how do you work with them and what their story is, and not before you get to the story that they're telling for a movement. Am I?
yeah,
Can you give me like a little bit more of a specific example? Because then we can dive in, we can dig in a little bit deeper. Or
yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to figure out how to pivot onto a pure stage where I can be of greater service to healing organizations and communities by working with leaders to look at themselves and their hero journeys and using the archetypes to find more love and compassion to create systemic change that heals us.
it sounds like your question has already been answered. I mean, what I hear you saying is that I mean, I hear you birthing a really cool new program, which is, really allowing leaders to see themselves through the language of initiation, and so, okay, what is it to become a leader at this time? What initiation are you personally on? And how can you understand, like, and that's one of the great things about storytelling, and it gives us a way back of weaving in these old parts of culture that it's been neglected, so we understand that birth is an initiation, high school graduation if you're lucky these days, marriage if that happens to you, and death. Those are kind of like the main initiations, unless you're Jewish, and then you get, something in there, so it's like what I'm hearing you say is you're like, oh wait, I want to give leaders this context of seeing themselves as being initiates, and I want to give them a bigger story. I want to give them the tools to understand what archetype are they consciously choosing. How many women do we understand? It's like it's kind of amazing what we see, that like just how in the last 30, 40 years about women, now having leadership roles in executive worlds. But we understand, through our Hillary Clintons, that they had to figure out how to be men in a men's world in order for women to have a place to be there. And so now we still have a lot of women playing out male archetypal roles, and at the time when we know that the divine feminine has to be in roles of leadership, right? So it's like what you're doing, what I see offering is having people, giving people the opportunity to consciously come alive. And what roles do they choose to play? And what is the initiation that they're on? And with every initiation, something's got to go. They're going to lose something. So what has to be lost? Hopefully not their family, right? How many leaders think that they have to lose their family in order to play this role? So it's like, what are they actually, what are they choosing to be, and what new expression of leadership is being offered when they do it so consciously, as you know. So I think it's a beautiful, I see a beautiful program that you're creating. and and it seems like it's in you, like it seems like you've got it.
Yeah, absolutely. My one catch on that is, as I mentioned before, the the brain on trauma is, I'm not sure what to do with that.
With the brain on trauma.
Yeah, our when trauma happens, our brains
Right. Okay. So
create
this is
different stories and
right. So I'm hearing this is a slightly different question. One thing is read my grandmother's hands, because he
yeah,
speaks
I
so much
wrote
about
that.
trauma. And then what I would say in terms of working with story and trauma, I work with I have a whole class that's just based on it. And if you're interested, I'd be happy
Okay.
to go through it. But
Yeah.
it's a very specific process that takes people from being, alive where that trauma happened, having to have it listened to, and then where's the flip when you start to integrate it. Stories don't change, but we don't change our stories, but our stories change us, and we're not the person that it happened to. So how do you give people that opportunity to have that maneuver, and then they can actually readjust so that they are on the other side of their story, and now they have the healing, they have the wisdom, they've walked through initiation, and they're and the healing that can happen, and the storytelling is part of that healing process. So yeah, I would love
Yeah.
to share that with you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. I'll look forward to more programs working with you, because I love Campbell, love the poetry.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Any other questions? I see that some of you guys just hopped on. You actually hopped on at the end of the class, and people were just asking a couple questions at the end. So if there's nothing else, I would say come back, watch the replay, and it'll be in your inbox soon. And away we go. Okay. Hi, Marie.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.